Welcome to Real Talk. I am your host, Paul Britton, and the with me today is the giant triumphant return of Sergio, the father of the pod, Sergio Barrera. Welcome.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
I had to tell you when I saw Father of the Pod, I was like, I kind of like that. I think I'm going to adopt that.
You are father of the pod, so so this is what happened. Just so everybody understands. I've commented on this before, but I'm going to say it again. In all of their brilliance, Hollywood decided to release 27 movies the week of Christmas.
Yeah.
Literally one movie the week before Christmas, and one movie a week between Thanksgiving and Christmas. But on the week of Christmas, it was like, oh, we need to get all this shit out the same week.
Yeah.
So last week, I got through the Kristen centric fare. This week we're doing the Sergio centric fare, and basically that just means Iron Claw. I as soon as I knew Kristen didn't want to do Iron Claw, I reached out to Sergio and I said, "Hey Sergio, look, I'm doing." Because he had even told, back in Thanksgiving, he's like, "Look, I'm not going to be seeing anything. I'm not going to be doing anything. I'll let you know when I get back to going to movies."
Yeah.
And I was like, I can't see the Iron Claw and review the Iron Claw and not at least let Sergio know this is when I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And you were kind enough to say you would come back on. So
no, I'm glad you reached out because it is. I really wanted to talk to you about this film, so
good.
I'm here.
Were you worried I wouldn't call you, or were you embarrassed to come back at me after
Oh no! More than anything, it was just I always, ever since I moved on from the pod, it's there's that pull where I watch a movie and I'm thinking like, oh man, this has got to be a Paul discussion, and so it just and I had a feeling that we would come to this point because again, my love of pro wrestling and its history,
right?
And this movie, I mean. Tailor-made for a conversation for you and I. So
So the Iron Claw is a basically a biopic about the Von Erich brothers, and so we're gonna start with that, not the movie, but just what does the Von Erich family mean to you? Small picture, even bigger picture. What does Texas wrestling? How does that play into your persona?
So, and it's I'm glad we're starting here because what I'm about to share, and I'll try to make it concise, is it definitely feeds into my view of the film.
Okay.
Because the way in which pro wrestling was structured at the time of the Von Erich family, it was what they call the territory days. Meaning that pro wrestling wasn't this amalgam under like one banner like it is today, like WWE and AEW, like major organizations. In the mid to late 90s, it was WCW and WWE. This was a time when wrestling took place in territories, and Texas was one of the most prolific territories when it came to pro wrestling. And the promoter and basically czar of wrestling in the Texas area was Fritz Von Erich, the patriarch of the Von Erich family. Actually, last name Atkinson. Fritz Von Erich and his sons played a role in pro wrestling in the Texas area and the surrounding states, and to the tune of what there's an equivalency here for those who may not know the history or even the world of wrestling. What a WrestleMania is today to the industry, the Von Erich family was to Texas and wrestling overall. The Von Erich family was one of the first promotions what was called World Class Championship Wrestling. It was one of the first promotions that got national TV syndication. And so there was a time where Texas was sort of the mecca of wrestling when it came to a promotion that was constantly making money. And so, all of your major wrestlers would come through the territory throughout the course of the years and at different times. The NWA World Champion, his role, whoever that was to visit territory after territory and make a mark by defending the title against the local talent in whatever territory they were in, be it Georgia, Florida, and the Northeast and so forth. Texas being one of the biggest areas, and one of the most prolific in terms of talent, the core and center of that was the Von Erich family. So it's Fritz Von Erich and his sons, Kevin, Carrie, Mike, and Chris, and David. And so these 5 brothers, there was a definitive difference in terms of the talent of David, Kevin, and Carrie. And then, as we'll talk about in the movie, the portrayal of Mike and the not mentioned at all in the movie Chris.
Right.
There's a history here that shows that these guys were all trying to make it in the business, but there was definitively those who were cut for it and others who weren't. And so if the world champion came through the Texas area, and Ric Flair, who was the champion at the time, said recently on his podcast that Texas was always a moneymaker for him. Okay. It was always, because when you were going to be there to wrestle Von Erichs, it was a rabid fan base. The Sportatorium would pack people in every Friday night, which was the home base of the Von Erichs. Yearly, they would have shows at Reunion Arena on Christmas and Thanksgiving and pack out 15,000, 16,000 people. They did a couple of shows in Texas Stadium, the first of which drew 45,000 people. So Texas was it of the Von Erichs, and the Von Erich family was who was in charge of that territory. And deep history at a time where wrestling didn't have a global view. And so you were I would watch as a kid Saturday nights, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, World Class Championship Wrestling would be on the local TV. It's, syndication. And then I was a rabid fan. And then right after that, at 11 was the local San Antonio promotion, Southwest Championship Wrestling. And so and you would get talent from World Class, from Fritz's promotion into San Antonio and all over Texas. So
sure.
So the family itself was like, they're labeled the first family of wrestling, and it truly was a thing back then.
And so like I would just say Iron Claw without saying anything else, and you would know instantly. That's the Von Erich family. Yeah. These are the brothers. Would you know the father? Like, did you know Fritz, or was that like okay?
Absolutely, because Fritz Von Erich, this would have been 78, 79 when I first started watching, and he was still involved in storylines. He was older. But he was one of those that could still go, even though he didn't look, he didn't look like wrestlers of today.
Right.
But he was the patriarch of the family. He wrestled many years. And Fritz would still, I think he retired from action like in 79 or 80. I absolutely, everything that was portrayed in this movie, I lived in real time.
Okay.
So much as you could with syndicated television, no internet, no, but Fritz was by far present in wrestling.
Okay. One of the things that happens in the movie, and this is not to start the review of the movie. This is tangential to it. It's more dealing with the history of the wrestling that I have a question about.
Okay.
Is that Fritz mentions that, the governing body that kind of oversaw the loose affiliation of these areas was the NWA.
Yes.
And it was pretty clear that the end, he says, they're keeping us down. They're not letting us get the title. And even when they did get the title, it was the shortest lived title,
18 days.
Yep. To this date, it still remains the shortest lived world title holder to this day. Do you know the backstory on why that is? Like, do you know anything factual or okay?
Yeah.
Cool.
And this is something we're going to get into in my view of the film.
Okay.
But from a factual standpoint, Kerry Von Erich wins the title, and 18 days later, they fly the National Wrestling Alliance flies him to Japan to lose the belt back to Ric Flair.
Right.
And the reason that is because as champion, he missed his first title defense. He no-showed a show.
Oh,
And while there is a well-known history of Kerry Von Erich being involved in drugs or having an issue with drugs, we don't know for sure that that's what caused him to miss the show. But
okay.
those in the know, Flair himself, promoters, people who ran WCC World Class Championship Wrestling, have come out, long ago and shared that he missed a title defense. And you didn't do that as the NWA champion because you were basically carrying on your shoulders the National Wrestling Alliance name. And
Right.
so when he didn't show up for his first title defense, which happened within a few days of him winning it, the NWA decided he was too much of a risk. And so they set up, Flair had moved on to Japan to tour there.
Right.
Because Japan is affiliated at the time with the National Wrestling Alliance.
Right.
And so they basically flew Kerry out. He, the match was set up for him to lose the title back to Flair because they couldn't trust,
Right. Okay.
they couldn't trust him.
Okay.
The portrayal of that in the movie is a great example of some of what I'll talk about.
Right. Yeah. The artistic liberties. Okay.
Yes.
I wanted to, because I didn't want to cloud too much of the review of the film with because I think that's an important historical marker that it's good to understand the history there. So let's go ahead and start the review of the film.
Sure,
now.
sure.
So thank you for giving us the sort of the historical framework.
Yeah.
Now the Iron Claw movie. So this is, again, it's basically a movie about the brothers,
right?
But it opens with a match that the father was doing, and I'll be honest. So one of the things that they don't show in the movie is they show the father there. He changed his name to Von Erich, not because he thought it was a good stage name, but because he was playing a Nazi heel.
Yep.
Like he was playing a heel. And I found it, and this is why I asked the question. I found it peculiar that he felt like he was kept from it for any other reason other than he was playing a fucking Nazi heel. And like, why would they have a Nazi heel hold the world title?
Right. And there is something to that, except that you have to think about the day and age of when he was wrestling.
Okay.
That wasn't as much of an issue as it would be in the last 25 to 30 years, even.
Okay.
In terms of his portrayal. What he decided in terms of leaving that persona was he wanted to become the more wholesome figure and create this family aspect for for his promotion, World Class.
Right.
And so he left that role because he wasn't wrestling full time anymore and decided that, okay, that's not the image that we want to go with here if he's going to be a long-term sustained promoter.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that was in his earlier career.
All right.
And being a heel draws a lot of money in wrestling because you're basically, the crowd is coming to see you get your ass kicked. Okay. And so he knew what he was doing, but he also knew that if he was going to sustain a promotion that was going to be a major player, to your point, that wasn't the way to go.
Yeah,
that wasn't
the way to fans liking him.
Yeah.
So we open with black and white with he's clearly in his heyday of wrestling, probably late 60s, early 70s. I don't remember if they gave an exact year. They did. I think it was 72 or 73.
Sure.
And so at that point, they have 2 kids and one on the way that we see, although we later find out that he actually had a 4th kid at that point, but one of them had passed away in a tragedy.
Yep.
And then the very next shot we see is a beefcake Zac Efron waking up in did they have that kind of physique back then? Because okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, the Von Erichs were very well known for, being the Kerry especially was, back in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a physique that was going to make it in wrestling.
Okay.
And the brothers had that. They had the dashing good looks. They had the physiques.
Yeah.
David, not so much. Kerry and Kevin more so.
Okay.
And then the 2
but
younger
David
brothers
was ginormous. He was super tall.
He was tall.
Yeah.
And before we go any further, let me just really quickly, I need to say this. These actors were cast way too short. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay.
But
yeah. Kerry especially. I understand.
Oh man, absolutely. But yeah, no, these guys worked really hard to portray these guys as they looked.
Right.
And
okay.
They were
And so that from that moment, as soon as we meet Beefcake Efren,
Yeah.
it becomes the story of the brothers, and
Yes.
it really is. Look, this movie, it's basically an indictment of toxic masculinity, while
Oh, sure.
also impressing upon us the strength and power of brotherhood,
Yeah.
wholesomeness too, like not in a negative way, absolutely in a positive, supportive way. And
Sure.
um within that framework, how, do you feel like this movie is an indictment on wrestling at all, or do you separate that?
I separate it only because I know the history.
Okay,
This movie is attempts to be an indictment on Fritz von Erich.
for sure.
Um,
And honestly, their
and
mom too, because she sucks as every bit as much as he did.
yeah, and therein lies one of my biggest struggles with this film.
Okay,
Is as someone who, if I don't know, stop me if you need me to, but I'm going to start. I want to say this.
go.
I believe that this film suffers from being directed from a standpoint of someone who read and thought he knew the history.
Okay,
And there was no consultation with Kevin Von Erich prior or during filming.
oh really? Interesting.
Not at all.
I thought he was
did
okay.
no, he gave it his blessing, but he found out about the film through his daughters when they
Okay.
started seeing posts of Zac Efron playing Kevin Von Erich.
Okay,
So Durkin and his team never consulted with Kevin, the sole surviving son,
right.
on anything. He gave it his blessing because he trusted that, hey, and it's such a moment of one of the naiveties of a Kevin Von Erich is that he trusted everybody around him that they were going to do
Okay.
right by him in the wrestling world. And this is a perfect example of kind of what happens even now in his older age.
Okay.
Because he literally last week just gave an interview in which he talked about how the biggest issue he had with the film was how it portrayed his father. Now,
Okay.
is it a father defending, is it a son defending his father? We don't know, because again, back then we didn't have the kind of insight and viewpoint that we do now, right?
Right. Right.
So I found it very interesting that there's an interview out there, a podcaster that I follow who was speaking to him right after the premiere, and he had just met Zac Efron.
Okay.
And so there's no consultation going on, and the
Yeah.
movie shows that if you know the history.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Sure. It if you know the history, you watch the movie and there are beats where you're like, that's off.
Big liberties taken. Big
Okay.
liberties taken. And I'm not a Von Erich defender.
Okay.
It's a tragic story when it comes to the sons. I have no doubt that Fritz was a hard driving, I don't even know what the word I want to use
commandeering.
Yeah, he was in control of his family.
Yeah.
And to what level, I don't know, but the way it was portrayed, if we believe Kevin Von Erich in his recent interviews, that's his only issue with the film, is that he never experienced what's described in the film in his life, is how he puts it. So.
Okay, interesting. So within the context of the brothers and their relationship, okay, so like some of the things that I know that got changed. One, they dropped the youngest brother, who, if I did a quick Wikipedia thing, I understand, he was actually diminutive. He was actually the height that the guy who plays Carrie is. And, he actually really wanted to be, he probably wanted to be a wrestler the most of all the family, but also he just had medical conditions that made it impossible for him to do it as a career long term. Did you feel like that impacted the movie at all, or were you like, was that just sort of like an editorial decision you get?
I get the decision. I definitely get the decision. But for those who know, it's a glaring thing.
You think it's a glaring thing, or
I do.
Okay.
Mainly because I think where you could have worked Chris into it was, again, the director Sean Durkin needed to trust that the audience could handle it.
Right.
Because if I look at it just as a film and a story, I don't even know that the way in which he portrayed the various deaths of the brothers,
Right.
none of which you saw other than Mike.
Right.
Like, he was the only one you saw commit the act of killing himself. In
Not
terms
Mike.
of
Not oh Mike. Yeah, I
Mike,
guess.
yeah,
Well, yeah,
Mike,
no,
the one who took the
but
pills.
but but I mean, you basically Carrie you there for it as well.
Yes, you hear the shot,
Yeah.
and then you see the aftermath.
Yeah.
My
Which is
what I'm
enough.
I guess what I mean, yeah, no, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that they needed to.
Right.
I think that because of how it was portrayed, every incident,
Right.
it was so quick. I
Right.
think you could have included. Now, I understand the notion of like, but do we want to keep taking the audience down that road again and again and
Right.
again and again?
Right.
Those of us who are purists would say yes, but also
Okay.
from a film standpoint, like you and I know, there are places for this kind of narrative
Right.
liberty, right?
And let me for those wondering, and as somebody who didn't really necessarily knew the history, but also was
Mhm.
intrigued enough to read the Wikipedia page, and also is bigger and more into movies than I am into this particular family. I get it, because here's the thing: is you have three with this construct, you have three brothers that die. And by the way, that is not a spoiler. Like
No,
like
yeah. If you
so
don't know that going in, I'm
yeah,
surprised.
yeah.
Yeah.
The, the first brother is Act 1. The story of the first brother is Act 1. The
Yep.
story of the second brother is Act 2, and then the story of Carrie is Act 3.
Right.
And from a narrative standpoint, only having the four brothers actually works.
Right. No, that I can see. I can
Okay.
see that. Yeah, for sure.
What the one thing that I found interesting though is is the mass compression of Carrie's story.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And you hinted upon that just before we started the review, when I kind of
Yeah.
asked you about the shortened
Timeline.
shortened title defense that he had.
Mhm.
What from that standpoint, how do you feel that impacts the sort of emotional heft? Because the obvious positive is it hits so much harder.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, because the movie portrays it as if he won the title
right?
and that night had
Yeah,
his accident.
exactly.
And so again, narrative liberties taken to go for that emotional impact.
Right,
When in reality, it was 2 years later when he
right,
had his accident, and then he still wrestled several years more
right.
with again, no spoilers if you don't know,
Yeah. Well,
with a prosthesis.
and they even imply as much in the
Oh
movie.
yeah,
They say that
absolutely.
he gets a WWF contract, and he's continuing to wrestle.
Oh yeah.
Did you know that he was wrestling without
No,
he was wrestling with a prosthesis
no, that's the if you're asking me
in real time?
in real time, did
Yeah,
we know? No,
right.
not at all. It
That's
wasn't
crazy.
until years later when the internet started to open things up, and
Okay.
there's a whole mass amount of podcasts that deal with
Right.
history, and the people that experience it started telling their stories, and that goes for all everybody in wrestling. And
Okay.
so, yeah, no, there was in real time no knowledge that there
Okay.
was a prosthesis.
All right.
And when you look back at his matches that he had in the WWE when he already had lost his foot, you can't tell.
Okay.
This was a guy. It's often been said that if he had just made it public,
Right.
that he would have gotten probably way more support
Interesting.
and way more, love from the crowds because of what he was persevering through. But
Right.
there is a definite portrayal in the film of Carrie's view that he'd let his family down.
Okay. Okay.
What the movie glides over and doesn't spend any amount of time on was how heavily the drug use was. And again, I don't say that maliciously. It's just
Right.
there's a reality to it. We
Right.
did get a montage scene where there was drug use and so forth,
Mhm.
but it was so quick.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. There's points in me that feel like, okay, is Durkin doing this out of respect, or is it to drive a narrative? But the challenge I had with the film is that knowing so much of
Yeah.
the reality of things, really hindered my ability to feel like the film was effective. So,
Okay. So
you know,
you had a really hard time divorcing yourself from the knowledge of the story
absolutely.
and delving
Yeah.
into the film.
Yeah. I have no problem admitting that, Paul, that up until literally a couple of hours ago, I had a conversation with our friend Nick Kramer over
Right.
lunch, was like, I couldn't, I knew too much. And in the film, I'm like, it's an A24 film, so it's going to be viewed very well.
Right.
It's going to be
Right.
thought of, has a great rating, you know.
Yeah.
But I struggled with feeling like it was effective because of how much narrative liberty was taken, you
Interesting.
know.
Okay.
And so no knock on the acting, no knock on the reason that I struggled with the portrayal of the mother is because we knew nothing about Dottie other than she was Fritz's wife, like literally at the time, right?
Okay. Okay.
And so, you know, and I can't even point to a book or anything like that the movie would have been based on. You
Right.
know, if that had been the case, then I would have been like, oh, okay, well, all right, at least there's source material.
Right.
But the acting was well done.
Mm-hmm.
I think Lily James just knocks it out of the park.
She did a great job.
But I feel like this movie would have been more effective if it hadn't been so, if it had been based on the story,
Okay.
more so than trying to put it together as an actual portrayal of events. Now,
the story here is clearly the framework around a theme is being presented, or you know, a message is being presented,
sure,
which is to reference it again, the toxic masculinity,
oh, yeah.
but also how brotherhood can overcome that to an extent, and
or can it in the case of the family, right?
Right.
Yeah, because the thing over from a thematic standpoint, you're absolutely right. That's what the movie's going for,
Right.
And is it effective? Absolutely. And I think where it hits the ball out of the park, if it does, and I've heard 50-50 on this, is the sequence at the end,
yes.
where the brothers reunite.
Yeah.
I get that is the only time in the film where I thought, okay, now I'm watching the movie. Like this is now the film. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I thought it's an effective thing. And again, because I'm interested, I listened to Kevin Von Erich talk about that scene and how he felt like that was one of his favorite parts of the film. That there was perhaps something to that, you know, because they a couple of them didn't know their little brother, their oldest brother that passed away, you know.
Right.
And so in terms of, did it accomplish what Sean Durkin was trying to have happen? I don't know. Because I know too much, you know.
Right.
And so, did I enjoy the movie? I mean, it was tough to say yes, because and don't even get me started on Ric Flair and the portrayal of Ric Flair.
There were aspects. My favorite part of the movie, though, was a scene with Ric Flair.
Was it the after?
Yes, it was the after. Because that felt like, I don't know much about wrestling at all, but if you grew up in the 80s, you were always cognizant of some aspects of wrestling, and Ric Flair was a character that I was aware of, and him doing the woo, like the actor just missed on every
worst woo.
It's just ever. Like if you're casting for that, your first whittling down of the casting call is you need to do the Ric Flair boo, and then from there you find the right actor to go.
You have to give it its due, because it's too well known.
Yeah.
The actor recently did an interview where he talked about the backlash that he's receiving from his portrayal, and he's like, well, as an actor, I didn't want to mimic.
Right.
But I'm like,
this
is a role that I believe requires that.
Everything but if you don't want to mimic his, everything about him, that's fine.
Yeah.
The woo you have to mimic.
And only because through decades to now,
Right.
Ric Flair is still out there doing
Right.
the woo with legitimacy.
Woo. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, you have to give us that.
Yeah.
And, it was just, I don't know. And that was one of the things that over and over and over, as I, went through the film itself and was watching it, I just was like, I'm too close to I'm too close to the subject material, which
Right.
sounds
Right.
weird because I don't know the family, right?
Right. Right.
Um,
But
and
you have a
so
long history with it. So.
yeah, and there were dude, let me tell you something. We won't go into it in the show, but
Okay.
I can tell you of things that. Do you remember the little sequence where I won't go into the long story, but I'll just point it out quickly. The sequence where Kevin Von Erich is waiting to get tagged into a match and he's frustrated because his partner is not tagging him in.
Yeah.
There is a whole backstory to who that person is. That person is Lance Von Erich, who
Okay.
was brought in by Fritz because he was running out of sons who were like Carrie was leaving, not because of death or anything, because none of that had happened yet.
Right.
The timeline of these tragic incidents was so truncated, and yet there's a whole story there
Right.
that if they had, I think they missed a beat there where they could have talked, seen how desperate Fritz was to keep having these buff guys as part of his promotion and call him Von Erichs.
Okay.
And so, but unless you know that, and the wrestler who played that guy for those 5 seconds, right, or whatever, 10, 15 seconds, you call it an Easter egg, but there's so much that they tried to put in that only the purist who's been in it for so many years and watching it for so long would be able to know. Oh, that's what that is.
Mm-hmm. And
so, yeah, I really had I struggled with this film because I want to give it its due because obviously the critics love it.
Yeah.
It's on more than a few folks, top fives.
10s. Yeah, for sure.
Top 10s for sure.
I have one more thing.
Yeah, please.
There's one more thing I want to cover before we get to
I've gone on. Sorry.
ratings. No, it's good. As a non-wrestling fan, there was a moment in the movie that I thought was really a jab at wrestling.
Okay.
And an intentional jab at wrestling, but also an acknowledgement of what wrestling was versus what it was becoming. And that is when Kevin faces off against Harley Race, where Kevin is this absolute Adonis of a specimen, and Harley Race is, a wrestler from the 50s. Even, started in the 50s, cut his teeth, in the 60s and was super popular all the way through the 70s. And at this point is just, let's just say doughy. We'll say that. And seeing those two people in the ring at the same time and realizing that Harvey Race, the doughy guy, is the one with the belt versus Kevin, and that Kevin has to act like this guy could actually beat him in anything, involving athletics and physicality.
Yeah.
Did you feel like that was like a punch, a jab at you, or was it just, did you find it amusing because, yep, that's how it was?
It was 100% accurate.
Okay.
And let me tell you why. Harley Race was the NWA champion in the years prior to folks like Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes.
Right.
Yes, he was from the old school, but he is a great example. And you see it even in wrestling today. Guys who don't have the body, but they can wrestle because they have the lungs. Harley Race came from an age of wrestling when it was called hooking, which means that it was real. Okay. There is absolute legitimacy to how he's portrayed in that piece of the film.
Okay.
Because he wasn't someone that was just you had to earn his respect. And if he felt like he needed to, he was gonna, do something to hurt you and get, basically say you're not ready. And so that was Harley Race. That was one of the best portrayals, short as it was, that really captured who the wrestler that was named was. I thought Harley Race in this film was perfectly portrayed. Because he was that guy, and he was champion many times for a long time because he was so tough, and he could carry it because he was also, remember, it isn't just the wrestling, it's, are you good on the mic?
Right.
And do people want to come see you? Are you drawing, as they say in the business, are you drawing money? And he could, because everybody wanted to see him get his butt kicked. You know,
Okay.
and so that was actually one of the pieces, and it was early on. So I was like, oh, okay, all right, I see. This is good because
Right.
I know Harley Race is actually from my early days, one of my favorite wrestlers.
Okay, cool.
One last quick thing along
Sure.
with that to go with that. One of the biggest questions I had going in was, will they portray wrestling as real or pre-planned as it is, right?
Yeah.
And the very first match that you see them in together,
Right.
they're talking about it in the background, right? And I love how they, kind of tried their best to get people who look like these guys, right? That they were wrestling. But then there were a couple of matches that they made it seem like this was a real thing. Everything was pre-planned. Right. And so when a movie does that, when it takes it into this realm of like, well, this is real, and you're really gonna, you've let down the family because you wouldn't release Ric Flair. It was booked that way, right? And so again, the movie couldn't decide, was the wrestling real or not. Right. Somebody said it perfectly. It was a movie about family that contained wrestling.
Okay. Yeah.
Is really the best description I've seen of this film.
Much like Godzilla -1 is a movie about post World War II Japan that has Godzilla in
it. Yeah. But it was so much better.
Well, here at Reel to Reel Talk, we do a taco rating, 1 to 5 tacos. And if you like something enough that you want to add a little extra juice, you add some guacamole to it. And why guacamole instead of a half taco? Because nobody eats a half a fucking taco. That's so, Sergio, where do you land on the Iron Claw?
So I've wrestled with this.
Okay.
And I have to, as I've done with some films in the past, I have to be fair.
Yeah.
I really had trouble separating the reality of what I knew from being a lifelong fan. Still to this day, still love wrestling. And the history of this family in particular and what I know, I had to separate that from a film standpoint. I'm just gonna land safe at a 3.
Okay.
Because I have to acknowledge that there are people out there who see this film as being a successful film that tells a good story.
Right.
The challenge for people like myself is, if you know too much, to use that term, this film is not gonna stack up. But I can't fault it for that.
Right.
Because it has strong performances.
Yeah.
If you believe what the story is trying to portray in terms of who Fritz was and who the brothers were, the roles were played well. The story was, it moved a little too quickly for me, but I get it. So I can't go higher than a 3, but I have to, if I'm being fair to the film,
right?
I think I understand why it's getting the accolades it's getting.
Where would you immediately after seeing it? What would your gut? What would, just if somebody walked up to you and say, "What are you doing?" What would you have done it without giving any context?
A 1. I was offended when the movie was over.
Oh wow. Okay.
I really was. It really bothered me. It really did. But after, and again, it wasn't until today that I had a chance to talk out my thoughts with another person.
Okay.
And I really got worked up.
Yeah.
But again, now that I've had a few hours, it's like I have to be fair to the filmmaker and the intent. But I can't go higher than 3, and I won't see this movie again.
Okay.
Because I don't think it does justice to the family. So,
well, I don't have the history. I liked it. I'm going 3+ guac. For me, I probably would have gone higher, but I did. The subject matter just misses for me.
Sure.
And this is just,
that makes sense.
That's just me, and so I had a really, really hard time getting into the story because of that. It just, as soon as I saw that the big fat guy get in the ring with Zac Efron, I'm like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. Yeah. And just every time they did the Iron Claw, you've got to be kidding me. Come on, stop it.
It's been called one of the silliest moves in the history of wrestling.
Yeah. And it's just like you, and what's really funny is that my brother and I used to imitate it, and I had no idea that we were imitating it. I had
you didn't know where it came from.
I had no idea where it came from, but we used to do that to each other, and we would be like,
it is this. Yeah. If you look, for those who who like wrestling of today, if you ever go back and want to see what masterful crowd manipulation looked like, go back and watch some of those old matches, because whenever one of those boys landed that iron claw, the crowd would go bananas. And so for its time, it worked, right? But yeah, it is a silly movie. If you pull that out today, unless it was a nostalgia thing, because they did have Kevin do it a few times in the last few years, when he was being like recognized by the WWE and stuff.
Okay.
It's nostalgic, but it just doesn't land anymore.
I did the guac comes from the fact that I do feel like the heart of the movie is genuine, and
I can agree with that. Yeah,
and for me that adds the guac.
Sure.
So speaking of silliness that some people take seriously, we're now going to look at Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire.
God. I'm so glad we're here.
So this really is sort of the what the hell did I just watch of this segment. So
it really is.
Yeah. So this is available on Netflix right now. Just super quick backstory on this. Over the past, I would say 6 years, Star Wars has been throwing, spec deals out at every major filmmaker in Hollywood, and has yet to make a single one of their movies. One such thing was Zack Snyder, and apparently he felt so convinced that his spec story was actually really good and worthwhile, he decided to say, fuck it, I'm going to make my own without actually calling it Star Wars. And so now we have Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire. Sergio, why, like, you're not watching a lot of movies, why did you watch this?
I watched it because the trailer caught my attention. It was purely that. Because I love a good action film. I love good sci-fi. And everything about the trailer was a hit. It was like the hook.
Okay.
But then I started watching it. And oh my.
Here, okay. Yeah.
I'm just gonna come out and say it, and because I really am curious to know your thoughts, because I think I know where they're going.
Okay.
This was a horrible film.
Yeah.
I hated this movie.
So that's interesting, because I'm going to say I didn't hate this movie.
Oh, okay.
But I also didn't like it.
Okay.
I just found it utterly ridiculous and self-pretentious. Now, but that's what Zack Snyder's become. So, like, I guess we shouldn't really be too surprised by that. Here's the thing. I am 100% all on board anytime anybody ever wants to make a reimagining of the Seven Samurai.
Right, absolutely.
If you want to make a reimagining of the Seven Samurai, go for it. Do it. But just fucking make a reimagining of the Seven Samurai. Yeah. You know what we don't need? All the bullshit that is built on top of this movie. Like, okay, you've lost the inherent known history of the Empire. That doesn't mean, and you wanted to make a Seven Samurai movie in that world. You can still do that without rebuilding the Empire.
Yeah.
You know, and without trying to pretend like, there are these people out there that are the fighters for justice that are, wink, wink, that are not former Jedi, that are hiding throughout the galaxy. Like, it's just so flimsy and convoluted and overpacked.
It is the issue for me overall with the film was simply this.
Yeah.
It had all of the Zack Snyder-ness that one would want, with absolutely no substance to its characters.
Right.
The script in terms of dialogue was horrible.
It's so thick and
it's just like, oh my gosh. And yet he's so great at creating imagery and spectacle.
Yeah.
But there's just no story here.
Yeah.
There is a story, but there's
way too much story.
Right. But at the same time, it's like, it just is so over the top that you're like, I don't care anymore about these characters.
Right.
Now, here's for me, the true, and I hope I'm not jumping the gun by saying this, but here is the true measure.
Yeah. In
terms of this Part 1, that regardless of how much I hated it, I'm gonna watch part 2. Like,
Okay, good. All right,
you
good.
know,
Because I was gonna say
so,
there's no way I'm not dragging you kicking and screaming on the
yeah, no,
part 2 review. So
I was just I asked myself when it was over, do you want to continue? And I'm like, weirdly, yes.
yeah, I need to see where this
So,
goes.
yeah.
I genuinely feel bad that Star Wars pulled the plug on it, because I feel like if Star Wars had just gone to him and say, look, we like what you're going for. We think that there's absolutely merit to making a Seven Samurai with
Mhm.
Jedis in hiding. Because guess what? I would fucking eat the shit out of that movie. I would
Yeah.
watch a Seven Samurai Star Wars movie
Right.
in just an absolute heartbeat. Even if it was Zack Snyder, like, but
Yeah.
you have to just say, Zack, look, we have to do a rewrite, because there's way too much going on here.
Yeah.
All we need are Jedis, and just let them know that they're former Jedis, and then, give them each a distinct personality, and
Yeah.
we are good to go. And guess what? We're good to fucking go.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
in. I am fucking in.
Yeah, and can someone please tell Charlie Hunnam that he didn't need to do the Irish accent? I mean, he's obviously not going to be back. Sorry, spoiler alert, but
Yeah.
yeah, there was just little things like that was like, okay, come on.
I was so excited when Charlie Hunnam showed up, and then I was so like, why are they doing this to Charlie
yeah,
Hunnam?
no, exactly. I literally let out an audible what? Because I'm like, no. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, I don't know if you know the TikTok creator Chef Reactions.
I do not.
People send him horrible cooking videos,
Okay.
where people are doing just horrible things, and he rates it. He always ends his reviews. He's like, I'll give it a 2 out of 10, but I would definitely try it. And so for me, I was like, I'm going to give it this, but I'm definitely going to watch the sequel.
Go ahead, Sergio. Tell me what you would give it.
Oh, I can't go above 2 tacos.
Okay.
And those 2 tacos are simply because it's visually a beautiful film.
It is so beautiful.
It is a gorgeous film.
It is so pretty.
But
I am
also
giving it 2 tacos. I would like to give it guac for just at the idea that I think this would have been a bazillion time better Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to, because that's not what it is. So
that's right.
Sergio, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for your extended explanation on the history of. I think it really added a lot to the pod, and your presence as always did.
I appreciate it. I'm glad to have done it, and I needed to be able to vent all that. So thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, and everybody stick around. I'm going to be doing super quick reviews of Aquaman and Color Purple as soon as I boot Sergio out of here. So
all right, Paul. Thank you again.
Thanks, Sergio. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, I am here. It's just me. I'm going to talk about Aquaman really quick. Hey, there's another DC Universe movie that may or may not be part of the DC Universe after this year, and this may or may not be the last movie that's part of the DC Universe, even though some of the new DC Universe movies have come. Guess what? It's all convoluted bullshit like most DC movies are. Guess what? This movie has a lot of convoluted bullshit like most DC movies do, but it has a few things going for it. One, Jason Momoa, who absolutely is by far and away the best thing that came about from the consistently good thing that's come about from the DC universe. I hope they keep his Aquaman, no matter what happens after all of this bullshit falls through. I hope they keep his Aquaman. And secondly, it has a pretty straightforward and evil bad guy, and that is something that most DC movies are lacking. So kudos to them to understanding that you just have to keep it super simple and really evil. Finally, I don't know why DC sucks at creating bad guys, but here we are. This movie's perfectly fine. I hope nobody's expecting much more than a super fine movie from DC these days. I would watch this again. I'm giving it 3 tacos. That's where we are. Look, I enjoyed my time in the theater. Was it great? No, it wasn't great, but it was perfectly fine. Bravo, I guess, for not making me hate a DC movie. The other movie I'm going to talk about real quick is The Color Purple. So for those that don't know, firstly, The Color Purple was a book. And then Steven Spielberg did an adaptation of the book starring Whoopi Goldberg and Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey was in the movie in the 80s. That movie honestly was the impetus for Oprah Winfrey getting her talk show. I still remember the early promotions for the Oprah Winfrey show, where they say, they used the fact that her name sounded like opera, and they asked, "Hey, sir, what do you think about Oprah?" And she's like, "Opera, I love opera." They said, "No, not opera, Oprah." It's like, "Oh, I love her too." And look, that's I'm dating myself. I was alive and cognizant of television before the Oprah Winfrey show. And I remember vividly the commercials leading up to its launching. But anyway, I digress. The biggest thing that we got from The Color Purple, the first movie, was the fact that it did not win Best Picture, and Steven Spielberg did not win Best Director. And then, and also Oprah Winfrey. And then they made a musical, a Broadway musical, which did very well, and I knew literally nothing about. But then it was like, hey, we're going to go ahead and make the Color Purple musical. And I'm like, okay. And I came into this movie super hyper skeptical. And I was super hyper pleasantly surprised. This movie absolutely works. Not totally. There are aspects of the movie that you get to and you're like, is this really where we want a musical number? And some of the musical numbers are totally missing the tone of the movie at that moment. That happens with Broadway musicals, but in a movie, it's a little more jarring, I guess you could say. But I would say 85% of this movie absolutely works. I really enjoyed it. Desi Gonzalez mentions on the comment, it had some cheesy moments. It really had some cheesy moments, but it's a fucking Broadway musical, and I love Broadway musicals. I'm just gonna be out there and say it. I've got my tickets for Hamilton when it's in West Palm Beach in April. I can't fucking wait. I can accept cheesy moments, but also what it succeeds at in hitting the emotional moments. I think it does that. It is able to get past those the cheese and still hit the emotion. And to that end, I liked it, and I really enjoyed this movie going experience more than the Iron Claw, and not just because it has an uplifting message, and I think it's a better movie, like overall. So I'm going with Four Tacos. That's how I landed Four Tacos on this one. It's literally like I look at these were the two heavy hitters that I saw this weekend, and I was like, I really liked my time in the Color Purple. I felt good about it afterwards. There was no point during the Color Purple was like, oh, this isn't working. I felt cheese, but the cheese worked because I knew it was a musical. So that's where we are with the Color Purple. Thank you all so much for coming out. I know that most of you came to see Sergio, and I don't blame you. But hopefully you'll come back next week. I will be back reviewing movies. Probably going to do Night Swim. By probably, I mean, yeah, I'm going to have to drag my ass to go see Night Swim, and that's okay. Look, it's January. It's Dumpuary. It's time to dump all the horror films that just didn't work, but you need a place to put them because you already made them. And I'm here for it, and I'm ready to go. I hope you are too. I will see you next week. This is Real Talk. I am Paul Britton. Have a wonderful week. Go to the movies. Bye.